Good? People in the back?
Woo!
Nice.
Hello everybody. Thank you very much for coming along. It's day whatever at Sundance. I can tell from your faces that it's not Thursday. And I'm grateful that you've come along and thank you for joining us for this session. We're very lucky today. We have Mr. Dan Berube here. So first of all, let me introduce myself and let me introduce Dan properly. What we're going to talk about today is primarily about the challenge filmmakers face keeping up with this huge tidal wave of fast-moving technology. And how do you navigate that? And how do you remain creative and stay true to your story? I think this is going to be really interesting. But I never listen when I'm speaking, so you have to tell me at the end. So, my name is Maxim Jago. I'm a filmmaker. If you are familiar with Adobe Premiere Pro, I write the book on Premiere Pro, and I have a lot of training materials online. But my passion is filmmaking. I'm the director. I've directed 50 films, and I am writing a metaphysics PhD about the nature of being. And the conclusion of the PhD is to get on with it. So I've just saved you reading 80,000 words. Let me just read you.
Is there a Kindle version?
There will be a Kindle version. I want to just read you Dan's bio as well.
Which one?
Well, the one you sent me, so you're responsible for this. So this is Daniel Berube. He's the founder of the Boston Creative Pro User Group, BOSCPUG, formerly the Boston Final Cut Pro User Group, globally connected and ready to collaborate with Adobe, Avid, FCP editors, and digital media makers. Dan co-produces the famous Super Meets, held annually in San Francisco, Austin, Las Vegas, Boston, London, and Amsterdam. And the Super Meets are large-scale gatherings of digital media makers from the world over that provide the post-production and broadcast community an opportunity to not only learn about the latest technology trends, but to connect with each other, to discuss experiences and opportunities within the industry in a social setting that is both educational and fun. And the reason I wanted to thank you very much for coming on, Dan.
Like today, thank you. And we started off as a Final Cut Pro User Group way back in the day. We are very much an Adobe user group, and it's the Boston Creative Pro User Group.
Now I wanted Dan to come along for this presentation because what happens at these super meets is, has anybody been to a super meet? Anyone been along to? Okay. So if you go to NAB or IBC, they're really, you need to go to these things because when you go to those events, if you walk around, NAB is the largest media technology event in the world. And I forget how many, and it's a mile and a half, is it, walk? It's a mile, I think, from one end of the hall to the other. So you walk through it, what happens is you're clocking up in your head how many things you want to buy and how poor you're going to be if you buy them, because it's a world of technology. What's special about the super meets that Dan organizes is that each of those key technology partners gets a little bit of a slot on stage to talk about what really matters, not just the general stuff. They don't get much time, so they really have to focus on the key new technologies and how they're enabling people to tell stories. So Dan is in a unique position to talk about that condensed knowledge of the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of technology.
And we do it in a way such that the people that are on stage, you get to meet and talk with them afterwards in an informal setting. That's at the other half of our super meet, which everyone is there showing off their workflows. So it's a wonderful place to meet fellow like-minded people, someone you may join in partnership with on a project or move forward just in general. It's called community. And that's important in this industry because this industry is all about relationships.
And that's a very good point that I think is really crucial for this discussion. One of the things that I've learned as I've gotten older, I was joking in the last session, but it's not a joke really, it's that the older I get, the more important my friends are. And it's brilliant because you have friends from college who turn out to be in charge of something, and I was joking earlier, it makes it easier to get into parties. But what I've learned is that my effectiveness as a creative person, and in fact, in any role that I have, I'm a futurologist, I'm a chief innovation officer for a film distribution company, I have a lot of different hats. The crucial difference is the relationships I have with people. It really is it. And I think that communication is a crucial part of that. But what I want to do, I'm going to suggest that we begin this discussion in the past, So what I want to do is talk about the past, the present, and the future, because I think that's going to help to give us some context for the really cool stuff coming up, and we'll talk about that at the end. So, you and I have been, you're a filmmaker as well, which isn't really mentioned in your bio.
Yes, it's very symbolic that I'm holding what is a key that has USB on it, but just as important is what's on it. And yes, I am a filmmaker. In the past, when I was young, and thinking about my career and studying and what I want to do, but growing up, I had a film Super 8 camera. I was very happy when on our birthday, and our twin brother and I, that we got our Super 8 camera from my parents with some film. And we immediately went downstairs and put up a black cloth. We were about 14 years old. I think that's when Star Wars came out. And we threw up a black cloth in our basement, and I went up to my mom's sewing room and grabbed a box of pins, and I brought them downstairs and I stuck them in the cloth, and I then turned a work light on the cloth, and suddenly it was a starfield.
Awesome.
And then I started taking pictures of that. We had our own dark room in the basement. We had a Super 8 camera. We developed our own stills and film. And we patiently waited to see what the results were. And when they first happened, everything was black. And we only got better with it. And we would do things like hang models and build models or objects and understand relationships and composition. I would also was a big audio fan, and I would act back then, which maybe some of you don't even know what it is, but I've seen a few of you, the cassette deck and tape player, which I got on the birthday of the film, of the Super 8 camera. Immediately I would tape things. I would tape TV shows, and then I would re-edit the audio. I was very lucky to go and see Star Wars at a drive-in. And I taped that whole thing. And I came home and I edited my own scene, and I would take all the, and it was like 3 or 4 cassettes, but I had one cassette that I would dub things back onto, and it was a lightsaber. And so, for some reason, I was a geek, yes, but I took all the and Ben Kenobi, this is a lightsaber. But I did that by editing on tape. And what are we doing today without tape?
Well, I want to rewind a little touch there. I want to know how you felt, how you really felt when you developed your first Super 8 film and it was all black.
Well, let's go.
What was that? Because that feeling, I think, is important because it's what it drives part of the work that we do.
Success arises out of failure, and failure is a good thing. And don't embrace failure because that's how you move towards success. I fondly remembered when we started a dark room, and I was so proud that I took all these pictures. I was learning about double exposure with my still camera, and I was getting the hang of it. And I developed the first double exposures with my dad, watching everything. He was proud of me, and with the red light on, and where is it? It was black, and it was a bonding moment between my father and I, but he encouraged me to keep going on. And
there was a quote I gave earlier on that said that the difference between the master and the student is that the master has failed more times than the student has tried. And I remember when I was at my second film school, we had a photographic project, and in the dark, same thing, taking photographs, developing my own stuff, and I began out with photography. And I remember the first time I went to do these self-portraits, and the first one I printed came out completely black. And then I looked at it in the light, and I realized that on first inspection it was black. But if you look really closely, when your eye adjusts, there was a silhouette. I thought it was awesome. I thought it was amazing. Of course I'm British, so we didn't say awesome. I just said it was really, really acceptable. So
not brilliant?
Not brilliant. Oh, no. Let's not get carried away. That'll be pretty major league to be brilliant. So I went back in the dark room and I printed every one like that. And then when we presented our work to the teacher, And everyone said, here's my shot of me in a tree, you know, this is me dressed up like an owl, or whatever it is. And it got to mind that the teacher did a double take. And he was convinced that I was ridiculing him. And I was, I believe, and this is a little thing that I think relates to what we're here to talk about, is I believe in, I'm not interested personally in cynical art. I'm interested in meant art. I'm interested in meant stories. Not postmodernism, thanks, I'll pass. I want stories that really matter because you care about it, and I think this is something that is important regardless of the technology we're using. And I was offended because I was in this class and the teacher made the class vote on whether I was taking the mickey or not. And it was 1 against, and he rejected my project. And I was saying, this is not pushing the boundaries here, you know? This is about perception and subjectivity. So I wanted to ask about that because it came out in black, and what was it that happened in your head that instead of thinking, this is rubbish, I'm never going to do this, and instead was, ooh, I need to learn.
My ideas was what kept me going. The need to take what's, in fact, my first company I called Noisy Brain because I wanted to get it out of my head. And that's exactly what back then I was thinking. It's like I was very passionate about, you know, the idea of very cinematic. And my parents would always tell me, you're a budding artist and you have that cinematic eye and develop that. And, you know, so I remember back in the 3rd grade when we would take, it was my first experience with something like a committee or a festival, if you will. We all were assigned to take magazines and just clip out things and put them together. And for some reason, I just did it, and I suddenly had a lumberjack, and I took his head off, and I put a moose head on it. And I was 3 years old. And for some reason, I just thought nothing of it. But by the end of the day, I was in the middle of all the classes in the 3rd grade, and I was like number 2 and number 1 showing off my art, and it was art. And so going back to it, the seeing the blackness, but understanding the light and seeing the light, part of it is your vision, and understanding what tools you have available to you, and understanding how the tools will evolve and how that can further help you is key.
I think this is a really important point, that ultimately I think what we are is storytellers. And as a storyteller, you use whatever is available to enhance the story. So as I've said many times, in the old days you would sit in a tavern somewhere and you might have a lute or something, or a flute, and you would play music to accompany the story. And the interesting thing about music, of course, is that it shapes the feelings of your audience, whether they want it to or not. So it's very powerful. The soundtrack's very, very powerful, very important. And of course, as time moved on, we developed more and more complex technology and tools to enable us to tell stories in a more and more nuanced way. And I think that as filmmakers, we are in the business of recreating the perception of experience. Now, I want to talk a little bit later about one of the ways I think we get that wrong, which is that we aim for precision. And I'm very interested in naturalistic filmmaking, not realistic filmmaking, but I'll get back to that later. But when I started out, my mother's boyfriend, I was 11 years old, my mother's boyfriend took me aside, and he said, I've been thinking about you. You don't like being told what to do, and I don't think you're going to want to work in an office. So I think you better be a film director. And I said, okay, can I go out and play now? And he said, yeah. And I didn't think about it again until I had my careers advice. And at 13, I was a rather precocious young man, and I had my careers interview. And I sat down. Who knows what they're going to do at 13? And I sat down, and the lady said, have you thought about what you're going to do? And I looked her in the eye, and I said, I'm going to be a film director. And she went, good luck. You seem to know what you want to do. You might as well send the next person in. And I got an extra 20-minute break, because I came out so early. And on that basis alone, I thought, this is great. If I keep this up, I'm going to get extra breaks all the way through school. And then I found out later that I love making films. But the reason I love making films is because I want to give experiences to audiences. And that's where, you know, here we are, we're in HP's Sundance House tent. HP are rocking the house for the hardware that people need. And the thing that's important for me about that, and we'll come back around to, you know, what specifically people are doing, but the important thing for me is removing barriers to creativity and having systems and tools that let you work without having to think too much about it.
In high school and junior, senior year, it was by then I was very good at art. I was in several art classes. I was producing my own portfolio, pencil, acrylic, and oil. We would always have art exhibits at the end of the year. It was my, again, more exposure to having your work seen. And my school guidance counselors were asking me, what did I want to do? I wanted to go to film school. I was actually fully accepted to be going to art school. Back then, I didn't understand because computers didn't exist back then. Where could you go? But I wanted to make film. And I'm very much identifying with what you're talking about, because it's all about realizing what you want and going after it and believing in yourself as along the way, because the tools will become available to you. And essentially, you know, it's even easier now for people. And so what that allows you is to then further thinking about getting it out of your head, putting it onto creative tools now that exist in several forms of media, but filmmaking and storytelling, we're hinting at the future, is evolving.
It's amazingly exciting. But I was saying in an interview earlier on today, though, that when word processing came along, there was this belief that two things would happen. The first is that nobody would be able to spell anymore because the system would spell for you, and of course the opposite happened. Everyone spelled better because the system was telling them all the time, you got that wrong. And apart from, you know, the bit where it said, oh, you look like you're writing a letter. And I want to talk about that more as well, because I'm very interested in AI in the creative process, artificial intelligence. But the second thing is they said this is going to be the end of publishing, because now everybody can publish a book. And so publishers will be out of business. But what they discovered is that a beautifully typeset, beautifully laid out, beautifully printed, terrible book is still a terrible book. So you had these authors saying, yeah, I'm an author, and they produce work, that it was just painful to read. And so actually what happened is that publishing became easier. And the truth is that publishing is marketing. As it is for film distribution. The logistics are simple, it's marketing. So I think what we're seeing now with this ubiquitous access to high quality media production equipment is that it really is setting the bar. Because if you have a vision and you're prepared to do the work, and you know they say, what is it, the 1%? It's 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration. And people say that, you know, partly life is about luck, and I find the harder I work, the luckier I am. That actually, the people that are there and they're prepared to put that effort in are the people that are using this technology to create great stuff.
The people that are there. And once you learn that you can't do everything by yourself, but you have ideas that you can develop, things become easier. So this all, I mean, we're talking about collaboration, we're talking about having tools that make it easier for you to concentrate on what your ideas are. And yes, the tools are very much available, but the cream can only rise to the top when you understand your strengths and work with others who can help you and establish those relationships with people that are like you and can add to your dynamics of telling a story with the different software tools and hardware. I could go on talking about this.
But this is absolutely crucial, isn't it? Because we're probably going to talk a lot about new cameras and interesting.
We don't even have to talk about that. I mean, you mentioned how people used to write letters, and now we're doing it through iPhones and whatnot.
One day telepathy.
And one day telepathy. I feel, one thing I do feel is that we're mixing our auras together in this room, and I again thank you all for being here to share in this.
But the telepathy thing is only half a joke. There's a UK organisation, they create a report, I think it's called DCDC, I can't remember what it stands for. And it's the UK military forecasting 30 years ahead. And 5 years, and you can download this, if you just Google DCDC, it's out there. And 5 years ago I read a report where they were saying within 25 years, so 20 years from now, technology will be so closely embedded into the brain that it will effectively replace mobile phones with something akin to telepathy. Now they were interested from the point of view of military implications. Now how can you tell who's communicating if the information is going brain to brain? And this sounds like science fiction, but the BBC about a year and a half ago they showed that they were able to play a sound and have someone hear the sound, and then reclaim the sound from the brain waves themselves, from the actual brain of the person, not from the auditory nerve or anything like that. So we are moving towards this wonderful connection between people. But again, it doesn't matter how good the technology gets at giving you those tools. You've got Dropbox. Is anyone familiar with Kalen Flowers? He's got a wonderful workflow for distributed networked media production, post-production. But the bottom line is you have to have people you want to work with. You have to have somebody at the end of the line that you want to create with. And no matter how much technology you have, nothing replaces that human element.
I still think that today the benefits of having, hardware like HP and software like Creative Cloud, so it clears the way for you to, again, to focus on who do I want to work with, who believes in my vision, how can I believe in your vision, and how can we make a vision collectively together that stands strong. And one thing I do believe in is you stand strong by standing together. So, all the success and failures that may have existed. I mean, I come from the age of editing on a squawk box, which some of you may not understand, or gain synchronizer, when you would take several strips of Super 8 or 60mm film with magnetic tape stock, go into a Steenbeck. And now what do we have today? I'm able to appreciate that. So from that point of view, I'm happy also with what I'm doing to be able to share that collective aura, if you will, and put that as part of the emotion and the passion of the experience of storytelling.
And in many ways, there's a problem I found as an editor, is that when it was hard to edit in terms of time, I mean, by hard to edit, I mean making an edit. You had to click, cut a thing, get some tape, make sure it was right, drop the thing, find it again. And when we talk about trimming, it's called trimming because you trim off a piece of film, throw it on the floor. 5 minutes later, you realize you need it, you crawl around on the floor, refine the thing. It's nothing like today, but it forced you to focus. It forced you to be very, very particular. And editors these days are quite lazy. They're just experimenting with stuff and trying it out.
You have, what, 50 films?
Well, 50 I directed, 60 I wrote.
Okay. And success breeds out of familiarity. Keep working at redoing, and you can only get better from it. And own the craft.
I was slow on the honing. So I want to talk about, I want to kind of contextualize this, because what I really want to talk about is the cool stuff coming up in the future, because I know it's amazingly exciting. But I want to give some context to this. So I think that historically, we were looking at organic processes, chemical shadows on film. And it was slow, and there was a lot of, you would produce stuff and it would be all black. Or you'd shoot something and you'd find out there was a fault with the stock. Or the camera mechanism would just break in interesting ways. Moving forwards, we've been through technology where you've got video now of acceptable quality. And we've got to the point now where I think it's fair to say, if you've got an HD TV and you watch a well-shot concert, it's probably better watching it at home on your HD TV than it is being in the concert where you've got a single point of view, you can't see people close up, and people are moshing on your shoulder. So we're reaching the point now where the technology is enhancing experience. But before we talk about the future, what do you think today are the most important technologies that are enabling people to be more creative?
XML.
Let's talk about that. Tell me about XML.
On the tables, you'll see a postcard for The Chain. That's a film that I just produced, edited and edited with Adobe Creative Cloud. Through that process, I had a team of people that I worked with. I edited, we filmed on the Canon C300, stayed in the MXF codec, that was based in tonal codec, stayed throughout the whole process of editing, and then finally went to ProRes 4444 during the conforming and process of color grading the film and conforming the project to the sound design. XML allowed us, and along with the feature set built into Adobe Creative Cloud, to be able to not have to worry so much about picture lock, but be able to still continue to own what the director's vision was, and also to go outside of Creative Cloud when we needed to work with Avid Pro Tools or DaVinci Resolve, or to hand off projects for other people to work with who are on the opposite sides of the country and then hand back footage to me. It made it tremendously easy to be able to do that with integrity. Now, I can let you talk about what XML is.
Well, actually, why don't you first of all define what picture lock is?
Picture lock is when you have your story set on a timeline. You're not going to make any changes to any of the scenes, the cuts, the timing, the arrangement of the shots. It's locked, it's synchronized with dialogue and your assembly that you can then hand off to your sound designer, your composer, and those who are going to finish the form as a deliverable for you.
Excellent. So I think what we're saying here then is that XML, which is this extensible markup language, is just a text language that allows multiple technologies to communicate, right? So
Yes.
that is contemporary technology that has massively improved our potential for collaboration, but not just for collaboration, also for the flow of workflow to hand off content from one application to another.
Right.
Okay, so what about cameras? So for example, at the moment, I think the fact that we're shooting RAW is a big deal. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, right. I mean, I didn't shoot RAW on the chain, but I have the Blackmagic Cinema camera, etc. And again, there, XML and metadata are extreme. If there's any takeaway from this right now, it's file management and organization and structure. And if you can get that on the beginning phases as part of your idea for your story, that will help you along through the whole process of the film, including now when I'm marketing the film and pushing it and making it accessible to open new doors. So,
but that's, I mean, there's a big thing about USB that nobody talks about. The thing about USB is that it's a standard that's defined by a technology company. And as long as everybody uses that standard, we can all get along just fine. So you can make a USB stick out of anything you want, and you know, oh, it's USB shaped, it fits in the USB hole, and the computer will see it and it'll work and it'll function. And it's a huge deal when these standards are defined, right?
I was dreaming about this when I was 14 years old. Here I am.
And here it is.
Yes.
So we're starting to see, you know, if you look at HD, like leading up to today, when HD, which is high definition, but should really be called higher definition, came along, there ended up being something like 50 different HD standards, right? You had all these different resolutions. And then eventually someone said, you know what, let's just say 1920 by 1080 pixels, that'll be HD. So these standards are, I mean, you're working with a lot of different technology companies coming and speaking,
Yes.
but they still have to toe the line to a degree, right?
It's all about seeing the light. And it's all about getting the light, which is helping to illuminate your ideas and get them onto a file that you can manipulate and assemble into a story. Whether it be raw, whether it be compressed or ProRes or H.264 or whatnot. The key factor is, and don't get caught up so much in resolution. We shot 1920 by 1080 for the chain. It has a life to us, and now there are tools like Red Giant and other plugins that allow you to upscale, so you can still extend the life of your project. The future, what's it going to be on? What are we capturing on? You know, is it even going to be film? Who knows? It could be. I'm really inspired by the HP Sprout. I don't know if anyone has seen that, but that's downstairs, but it's basically a device or a computer that has a scanner built in that I could put objects in, and it scans it, then I can manipulate it while I'm there. And think about trying to, if you're previs or trying to come up with, you're at the stage where you have an idea and you start to assemble storyboards.
And
that's what's amazing to me.
Yeah.
And it's, you know,
it's exciting because it's right there, it's tangible. And I think very often we forget that we're primates, and we like things that can hold and move.
absolutely.
So, but I want to come back to this question about resolution before we get onto the future stuff. So, it seems to me that right now, the big deal technology that we have right now is, for example, we've got mobile computing from companies that, you know, the HP laptops, They've got very high quality dream color displays, so you can accurately view your content. Calibrated displays. They're very fast for processing, fast hard drives, storage drives, loads of memory, all of this stuff that as a user, most users just go, oh, it works. But as a technologist, you think, when you see the statistics, the numbers, you think, oh my goodness, you know, it's amazing that they've done that.
Right.
And all of that is really about giving more flow, right? But it seems to me that where we're at right now, not coming up in the future, but where we are right now, is we've got great cameras that shoot high resolution with a good latitude, that's very big files, but we've got the technology to handle it, and we're in this new era of being able to do pretty much anything we want with our media. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Again, the key takeaway is file management, organization, and structure. You need to identify with tools and software that can allow you to manipulate these large amounts of data. I mean, we had Walter Murch present at the Boston Super Meet several years ago, and he was talking about his HBO film, which the name escapes me. He was talking about how they're editing digitally and how it all came down to ones and zeros, and how essentially the old way, or the way that is that film, and editing in film, and editing with film during the editing phase, and the amount of the sheer weight and the storage and the immensity of all that.
You mean literally weight? Because I've carried
literal weight.
You know, this stuff is heavy.
In space, and now, essentially, this could be 128 gig, and it could have a lot of information on it, and it's fast enough. But then there is now technology and software that allows you to take that ones and zeros, and now there's cameras. I'm so amazed and thrilled that you have the GoPro here earlier. Is that 4?
That's 3.
3, okay. Well, the 4 just came out and that's shooting 4K. There's other people that I see have been shooting DSLR in 4K and 2K. So, I mean, it's just the idea that this information itself doesn't weigh anything, but you still need the bandwidth to be able to move that. And so sitting here is not by serendipity by any means. Very thrilled to know that, being able to know that Adobe Creative Cloud is going to take whatever you throw at it. But think about how you're manipulating the timeline and what hardware you're using. And
we're talking about resolution. One of the things I've been saying for a long time is that actually audiences don't really notice the picture's a bit fuzzy or a bit grainy. As filmmakers, we're always trying to push the boundaries and go for the highest possible resolution and the greatest clarity. But the truth is that the audience, hopefully, is busy thinking about, oh my goodness, he said that, and she thought this, and that exploded, and they're more interested in what's happening in the story. So I'm not convinced that resolution is that important. But we've got different boundaries now. Now, I think that we're going to top out at 8K. And the reason I think that is that if you think about a home, and I mean 8K for home distribution, if you think about a home, because of our physical size, the biggest wall in your lounge, in your living room, if your entire wall is your screen, at 8K it's pretty much going to be a retina display. And we're not likely to get much bigger, and our rooms are not likely to get much bigger, and our walls are not much likely to get bigger, so it's probably going to top out at 8K. But we're now looking at new boundaries. If you look at, historically, the reason film was shot at 24 frames per second is because the image effect in your eye is something like 21.66 of a second. So they added about 10% to make it 24, and that was the minimum number of frames per second that you could have the illusion of movement. And they would shoot at a 50th, which if you know about photography, a 50th of a second gives you a tiny bit of motion blur to fool the brain. And the reason they were shooting 24 frames per second and not 48 or 50 or 100 or whatever is because the stuff was not only super expensive, it was actually explosive. And every now and then, a piece, your film cam would literally explode or instantaneously combust. And the reason noir was created was because lights were super expensive, and of course the amount of light produced would go down over time. Thankfully they weren't shooting color yet. And somebody came up with the idea of saying, you know what, why don't we just have one light and say we meant it that way? And that's the origin of film noir. Did you know, for example, in I think it's the 50s, there were lots and lots of UFO movies made in Hollywood. And it was always a flying saucer. And some of you may have seen this story. The real reason all those films were made was that Russia had a flying saucer aeroplane, and it had such a great range that it could get into American airspace. And the American government felt that the American people would be less afraid of aliens invading the Earth than they would be of Russians getting into American airspace. So they instructed Hollywood to make films about space invaders. And Hollywood said, okay. So they made lots of films, and it was always a saucer-shaped thing. You can see the photos on there, it's great. Now, we're in a situation where the technology will do pretty much anything you want.
Russian filmmaking, Sergei Eisenstein would often talk about, when I studied that at Emerson College, they were making films without actually having film in the camera. They're going through the practice of doing that without having film. So at the end of the day, they didn't have a film, but they went through the process of that. They still practice their craft. Nowadays, the cost per click, the cost is nothing. And storage is becoming so incredibly accessible that you can now do things with a 4K camera, and resolution does mean something now in this context, because the type of storytelling that we're doing now, it's not just about the resolution itself, it's about what's in the frame. If you're able to have 4K, and this is done now, and Lucas, I think, still coined it, he called it the super take. When you're taking performances from different takes and mixing them together, or you're filming a background shot that you then add in from 3 different sources, or the fact that you can shoot this right here, and then I can zoom into you because you're shaking your head at me, but I have that resolution to be able to maintain the integrity of the actual image. I'm thrilled about what is available for students and filmmakers now, and what type of stories are going to evolve, where storytelling is evolving across the medium, across takes. People are going to reevaluate picture lock and that's a take, that's a shot, and understand what they can grab. This is the future. How is storytelling going to change? How's the process? We're so ingrained with Hollywood filmmaking, but today's filmmaker, the Adobe filmmaker, the HP filmmaker, however you want to brand yourself, think about how you can rely on each other's strengths and weaknesses and dynamics, and how, you know, the painter, the spoken word artist, the songwriter, the cinematographer, the director, and how you put your images together. That's the true resolution.
And it's an interesting point, because, you know, we went through this phase, particularly in the UK, where suddenly everyone was expected to do everything. And it started out that you would be the writer, and the cutter, and the CG person, you would do the lights, all separately. And then it turned out that a small number of people were able to do everything. And once the people with the money found out that a human being was capable of doing everything, they decided that all people should do everything. And for example, at the BBC, they reduced the crew sizes. But I think that what's happening now is, because we've got so much more efficient collaboration tools, we're going back to specialization. And that's what I'm beginning to see.
I mean, I was able to, from my image that we recorded for the chain, I was able to take the postcards that you see, and I was able to produce that from the 1920 by 1080 images, and it's scalable to some point. But now that you have 2K, 4K, think of how you can have a better understanding of how to market your ideas and shoot the film, shoot the story, and understand that along the way that you're going to be able to have elements and assets that you can then use tools to be able to produce the marketing collateral that you need to further get your film seen by others who will then be your agents and your admirers or your fans and whatnot. And that's how you define your audience, that's how you define the community. That's true resolution.
Absolutely. You know, it's about...
Not to toss it back at you for more...
It's about getting the message across. Yes. And we're finding it easy and easy to do that. Just to touch on the resolution thing, you know, if you're mastering HD, so it's roughly 2K resolution, and you shoot 6K, you have 9 times the image resolution, which means you can just shoot wide. And you can actually take, so now it means that you can take multiple completely different compositions from the same original camera angle. And this is opening up the landscape. Now if you look at Gone Girl, which is a good example of a 6K workflow, they shot 6K, framed for 5K, and mastered 4K. And the reason they framed for 5K was so that they had 1,000 pixels of horizontal resolution, about half that vertically, of wiggle room. So it means when they're filming, if they don't quite follow the action perfectly, if they don't quite get the framing just right, it doesn't matter, because you did get it. So we're now seeing a situation where the technology is giving us even more freedom. Now, to switch on to talking about the future.
Do you remember the British film Rules of the Game?
No.
It's watch that, Rules of the Game.
Okay.
It's a lot of long, wide-angle shots where everything's composed, where there's a lot of things happening within the frame. It really does add to this conversation.
Well, I mean, I think this is a very interesting point. I want to switch to talk about the future, but I think that the very interesting issue that we have is there was this explosion of mediums. You've got different sizes of phones, TVs, watching on the laptop, going to the cinema. And for years now, people have been saying this is a big problem, and nobody has actually come up with a solution. The best solution we've got now is if you work on a really big budget production, they will allocate a significant amount of money to produce a cut and a grade and a reframing for each individual platform. It's an enormous amount of money to make sure that the film looks as good as it can in every possible medium. I think I'm a little bit lazy as a filmmaker. I can't be bothered to do that. I want to make films for the cinema, but there is a difference. They would always say if you're shooting TV, you shoot close because it's a small picture in the corner of the room, and you want to be able to see the facial expressions. But if you're shooting film for the cinema, it's much more like theatre because it is a big screen, and you can and also means you can give more time to the shot. You can allow the eye of the audience to move around the shot and take a narrative journey just because there are different things for the audience to look at. So it's a fundamentally different kind of filmmaking that we don't talk about that much because we're too busy thinking about resolution and data rates and
Master shot, wide shot, I encourage all of you to, any takeaways from this, is think about the strength of your ideas. And for me, I mean, when I was in 3rd grade, I took magazine articles and I clipped them and I put them together. That was the basis of my editing. I edited with cassette tape and audio, and now I'm doing it all digitally. And it's building upon your experience. And I'm just amazed about what we're going to see this year and the years coming, about how we're going to be able to work together as filmmakers and have our work seen, whether it's, and being able to, don't feel daunted by the fact that more and more things you can do by yourself. Embrace that and understand when it's good for you to pass it off with those that work with different tools or similar tools to yourself, because it's not about the tool, it's how you create with it.
Absolutely, and there's a friend of mine who's a motion graphics artist called Bun Lee, and we were working on a program at the Cannes Film Festival where we were helping new filmmakers to do stuff. And actually, it was a project with a collaboration with HP, in fact, and we had a bunch of laptops and kit. It was a great project. And Bun Lee was, one of the delegates was saying, I'm not sure if there's a way of getting this thing on the screen. And Bun said, if you can imagine it, we can do it. And I really think that we're at the point, and this is today, I really think, and I want to talk about things like the Oculus Rift, future medium, but
shooting by the light of the moon.
Yeah, oh my goodness. So, we're already at the point where we can make computer-generated imagery that doesn't exist, that is indistinguishable from the real original content. If anyone saw, there was a video that went around the internet of Gone Girl again, and it had all the CG shots, and there are a ton of them. And they show you the before and after, and you can see, people walking in front of green screens, and then they show you the finished version. You cannot tell.
I just had my user group meeting. I run the Boston Creative Pro user group, as I said. The day before I came here, on the 23rd, we had our monthly meeting. I had the visual effects supervisor from Rodeo Effects from Montreal, Canada, who did the effects for and coordinated all the shots for Birdman. And there's also a bird exhibit downstairs, or the new Frontier exhibit that you need to check out. But and this was the first public showing that we could show because they're very sensitive. Because the film, has anyone seen Birdman here?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's all one long shot. It is amazing how you can use everything that we're talking about, the tools, to be able to define or realize the director's vision. And the way that they were able to cut on swoosh pans and shooting with inverted two shots and having a camera that's free to see people that came in and out with camera rigs, using steady cams and moving around people and cutting on people going out of the frame and in the frame. This is all the super take that Lucas talked about.
So the whole film is the super take.
It is one amazing film. I mean, I understood, I knew what we were going to show, but just seeing it, it's still magic to me. They showed us how they did it. It's still magic to me about how they can do that.
And what you're touching on there, I think, is a really beautiful aspect of the craft that we don't talk about that much, which is that there's something magical about telling stories with this medium.
Elvis performed with a $12 guitar. The Beatles had a 4-track recorder. The Beatles had a 4-track recorder. Paul McCartney likes to record songs in one take. But now, what you can do, I think storytelling itself, we're at a stage, we're on the cusp of where, hopefully, we're not scraping from the bottom of the barrel anymore for ideas. And the accessibility of the medium. Okay, my grandmother can do it, but my grandmother has a lot of personal stories that she can go out by the light of the moon and tell them. And
well, this is another thing that I think is very interesting. I want to move into the future before we quit, but I do think we're at the point now where you have ubiquitous access to fantastic quality technology. We've got these cameras you can shoot in moonlight and it looks fine. We've got machines that can handle the data. We've got mobile editing devices, small cameras, very high resolution. We've got all this technology available, and it just means we've got this wonderful, wonderful palette of colors as storytellers that anybody can pick up and share their story. We were speaking about this in a previous session, that it seems to be quite fundamental to our nature as human beings to need to tell and to hear stories. In fact, there was a linguist that was saying that as a species we developed the written language relatively late, relative to the complexity of our civilization, because we didn't need it. We would use stories to remember the information instead.
Does the kids in today's schools, do they practice handwriting? I remember when I had to practice my R's to get the R right. What are they practicing now? Are they practicing immediate file management?
My handwriting, my handwriting is so bad. I'm left-handed. My handwriting is so bad that at school they forced me to take lessons writing with my right hand because they thought I'd learned by accident with my left hand. They thought.
All I know is that the kids today are working on a cloud that they're going to. We had the discussion. We were having sushi yesterday, and while we're sitting together, we were also having several conversations on our iPhone, texting. Someone was Skyping us. We were sending pictures. They were sending us.
People in other countries.
In other countries.
In different relationships, different roles.
So think about how if there's something. Go out there, be inspired and confident in what you want to realize for your vision. Know that there are people out there who are going to support you if you are open to this.
So let's talk a little bit about the future. So one of the things I'm just going to touch on that I think we are yet to see is the introduction of a deeper access to artificial intelligence in the media that we're doing. And I want to just throw one idea out there as an example. Has anyone seen the Amy device? It's a gimbal for drones. You wear a little electronic marker, and then wherever you go, it aims the camera at you. So if you look at games, technology, games like Grand Theft Auto, the camera the virtual camera in those games is not just tracking your movement. There's actually an artificial intelligence camera operator deliberately framing the shot. So that's why when you play a game like Grand Theft Auto, every now and then you get this awesome image, which, yes, in Britain we would say is brilliant. You get this brilliant image of the sunset behind you as the car's driving, and that's not just a procedurally generated camera angle, that's an AI framing the shot. So one of the things I think we're going to see in the future is camera rigs that are AI camera operators. And you'll just say, follow that guy, follow that lady, and stay in the mid-shot, and it'll frame it perfectly.
Stone Knives and Bearskins. Yeah. John Dykstra, who did the visual effects for Star Wars, and how he invented the motion control, camera. This is what you're talking about now. What's available for the young filmmakers and the people that are, in us, all of us. This is amazing stuff. And even you know, there's a reason I mentioned like the Sprout that's downstairs and whatnot. This is a, you know, I remember Lucas talking about how in the future he's going to be making movies that he has yet to make because he's waiting for the technology to evolve.
Right, and very often progressive films create new technology. That was the thing with Avatar, wasn't it? And that was there was a collaboration with Adobe with that, where Cameron wanted to see what was happening live, and they had to develop new technology to make that possible. So he wasn't waiting around and imagining and hoping that it would be okay. So I think the AI is going to be really interesting. What I'm waiting for is an AI assistant editor. Wouldn't that be amazing? I'll give you an example. Let's say
there is a person by the name of Philip Hodges, who you may not have heard of, intelligentassistance.com. He actually came out with a piece of software that will actually edit things for you. Now this is a step beyond that because...
Well, I mean, even if you look at consumer applications like Premiere Elements, iMovie, they have this kind of automated editing built in.
It still comes down to dotting your I's, practicing your R's, but in a digital age, preparing your media file management, and organization and structure so that you can allow these technologies to enable you.
Right, it still comes down to you knowing how to make films.
Right.
And that is something that, you know, I teach editing a lot, and what I get hired to do is teach them technology. But you rarely get a chance to teach why do you cut there? Why is that frame the better frame to cut on than that one?
Think about how that your assistant editor is there with you virtually. How if you prepared that your assistant editor virtually to work for you, think about the storytelling that we're all going to see in the years to come.
I'm just thinking of Scarlett Johansson's.
What's that?
I was just thinking of Scarlett Johansson as my assistant editor. But imagine if you had a system where you could say, you get a couple of shots, and you're pairing the media and you're merging them, and you've got a whole massive stack of shots with sync audio, and you can speak and say to the computer, just sync the rest of those. And the system's able to detect that there's a naming convention, and it'll pair them up, and it'll say to you with words, this is going to take about 5 minutes. And you go away, and it calls you and tells you, I'm done.
One of the people roaming on here, Adrian Bellick, did the film Happy and Genghis Blues, and we were talking, and he's talking about how do you feel? How's that going to interplay? Where you still need to, you know, you're speaking, take over, but, you know, when will it be where this an AI can feel what we're feeling? To be able to translate that, not just make the cut, but work that edit. Where does it, you know, the transition, does it start in the beginning or the middle or the end, and working the elbow, as they say it?
Well, as long as it's Scarlett Johansson, that shouldn't be mandatory. But seriously, I think we are going to see more and more nuanced interaction from artificial intelligence, and I think it is going to become better and better at making those judgment calls. It's pretty scary, but if you map human behavior, if you model human behavior, you can produce pretty nuanced results. The problem is processing, it's about data, it's about making semantic. Now if you look at Google, Google purchased a company called DeepMind a few years ago that is a semantically aware artificial intelligence system. And what it needs is a really big database to refer to, which just so happens Google has quite a big database. So I think we're going to start to see more and more of that happening. But putting aside the artificial intelligence, I'm interested in some of the other technologies that are coming along. And I want to mention just briefly this 360 media things. Everyone had a look at the new frontiers, and you've got this the bird gliding thing, which is incredible. And what I found about that is that although I think it's very interesting that you can look in any direction, and cameras are being developed that will do that, and we've got some technical hurdles coming up with that, because some of these cameras have 16, maybe 22 cameras built in, and you have to somehow manage that with your technology. But what I found from my own experience was that being able to look in every direction was not particularly immersive. The thing that was immersive was much more subtle than that. It was that I could move my point of view small amounts all of the time. That as my head naturally moved, and I tended to look a little bit to the left or the right, the image updated immediately, and that was what made me feel like I was immersed in the environment. What are your thoughts about that?
Can you imagine putting together a film in that fashion? And it's still, I mean, XML metadata. In London, there's so many cams, but they're all tied together through metadata. And think about how you can actually, and Google Street View, and being able to do, and Pre-Pro, being able to use the apps that allow you to look at a location that you enter in Google and then look at the time of day, and be able to map when the sun's going to hit that building, and you can actually compose and do previs that way. Imagine, you know?
There was an amazing story in the UK that in Britain there's a lot of cameras, a lot of CCTV cameras. It's a big thing. And there was a production company where they wanted to shoot a film in a public place where they didn't get permission. But by law in Britain, you have a right to any CCTV footage of you. That's the law. You can contact the police and you can say, I want everything that I've been filmed in. So this company, but they weren't allowed to film in the street, but they had a right to the footage. So the company put radio microphones on the cast, no cameras at all, had them walk down the street performing the lines, and then they had the cast request the content from the police. And you own it because it's of you. So then the cast signed off the footage to the production company, and they had great audio because it was radio mics, they were walking around in the street, and they just used the CCTV footage as the camera. And of course you have to mean it has to be the aesthetic of the film. But I thought it was a pretty smart way of getting around the problem.
Permissions, and will governments have to change to allow the fact that we could tap into each other's aura, their cameras, their written stories, everything that they've organized in the cloud and media managed, and what can you pull together?
How do you deal with it? So I've got one last question for you. What are you the most excited about in terms of the future of where you see things going in terms of media technology? What's coming up?
Well, I mean, there's so many things coming up. I like the idea of virtual reality. I remember, writing my ideas down when I was like 23, saying that we would be in one room together, and maybe sitting like at that table, the three of you, but you're all seeing something different, or you're seeing, like going back to the idea about we're having a conversation with 5 different people from different parts of the world. You and I are talking verbally. We're also communicating with our fingers and our pictures, and telepathic. But I just, have hope for the future that we can all understand the strength of our vision and how that can possibly change storytelling, so that it's not just about the same thing. It's not just about scraping the bottom of the barrel. It's about combining everyone's ideas together and making new stories out of that. I really think about third world countries, and that you might make a friend, or that you can actually collaborate with and create. This is exciting to me. And I can't pinpoint one technology, but there's it's just being able to live in these times that I think that we're very close to something that's equivalent to color TV, or we're about to transcend in our filmmaking, and I hope that we can all find the vision together and understand that passion and emotion and humility are all universal language, and how do we tie these tools together to allow us to make that? That's what's exciting to me. You asked me the question.
I think that's a great answer. Fantastic answer. I think what you're describing is the end of geography as a factor, isn't it? It's about realizing that we're all connected and being free to connect, and the technology allows us to do that. It's really exciting.
And it's going to become more immediate, and at the same time very personal. And these are exciting times to be in.
Well, thank you very much. All that remains is for me to thank Dan Berube. Thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you all. And I hope you're enjoying your Sundance experience. This is my first time here, so I'll be back.
You look appropriately exhausted. Thank you very much, and thank you to HP. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you.